So we've talked about a ton of different console revisions here on the channel, but there was one I wanted to cover here specifically with Sony because we've talked about a couple of different Sony revisions with the PS3 and even the original PlayStation. However, their most impressive revision, I think, has to do with the PlayStation 2. It released in 2000, but 4 years later in 2004, they managed to take this form factor for the PS2 and shrink it down to something that's about the size of two PlayStation 2 game cases. And today, I wanted to go through both of these systems and show you how they did it. So if you guys enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel. Now, I did get both of these off of eBay. They had mentioned that there were some things wrong with them. Typically with the PS2, the PS2 Slim, it will come back to things like the disk drive either not opening or not reading. So I figure this will give us a good way to kind of break them down and compare them side by side, which is a good way to start things here, just putting them legitimately side by side because the difference is so obvious, and what Sony was able to do here with the larger PS2 going to the PS2 Slim was impressive then, because at the time, the PS2 was seen as a powerful system. When it came out in 2000, there were even rumors going around that the system was being bought and hoarded by other governments, I believe, and countries to use for missile defense systems. And I mean, a lot of us, I'm sure at the time, were looking at this rumor online and hearing it on like playgrounds and at school and stuff. We're like, that's probably not true. But then we'd see games like Metal Gear Solid 2 and Final Fantasy X, and we'd be like, oh, maybe someone should look into that. Now, in order to shrink the PS2 down to the Slim, there were some things that had to change and even be outright removed. For example, the expansion bay on the original PlayStation 2 was completely eliminated. And I'm sure Sony was looking at data to back this up, and they realized, okay, not many people are really installing a 3.5-inch IDE drive into these PS2 systems, kind of like we were thinking when we first made the system. So we're gonna go ahead and eliminate that, and it was mostly used for things like Final Fantasy XI at the time. However, while they did remove the expansion bay, they did add an Ethernet port for network, which was a nice addition because otherwise we had to buy the network adapter for the older PS2 model, which gave us access to that hard drive bay as well as an Ethernet LAN port on the back. So it was at least something that Sony did to make the PS2 Slim more relevant, I would say, in 2004, and you didn't need that optional piece to get it. Now, the other thing they did was they had to remove the power supply from inside the system and package in one of these bricks. Now, later on in the Slim's life, they did work to put the power supply back in the system, which was nice because then we just have a typical plug and then you just run into the wall. You didn't have to have this brick that you would try to hide behind your entertainment center or something. And these had their own problems, which is why Sony worked to reinstall the power supply in these Slim systems later on. There were like 19 different revisions of the PS2, and the Slim itself had almost half of those. But the most obvious change that a lot of people probably remember this system for was that they went to kind of this flip top design. Technically, they worked backwards to what they had with the original PlayStation and the PS1, as that had a door that would just kind of open up on a hinge. And really, it worked. I guess the issue we had here was that the disk drive itself took up a lot of space and was at times unreliable. Sure, there's like an entire spring here, but really, as long as you get the door open, it was fine. Even if that spring was completely missing, you could press the button, open this up, put the disc in, and then make sure it was shut. And as long as the sensors were pressed down, it would still play the game. All right, with the comparisons out of the way, we're gonna go ahead and open both of these up here. And they have plastics kind of around the bottom, just covering up different Phillips head screws. Also, you know what? I'm curious if you preferred one over the other. Like, did you grow up with the older model and then upgrade to the Slim and like that one more? Or did you like the older model more? I do know that the modding community much more prefers the fat model because of that hard drive space in the back and all of this. And I think the Slim models, depending on which one you got, has issues with some of the soft modding programs, but I'm curious, the general consensus, do people prefer the fat model or the Slim model? Okay, so all the screws out, the lid comes off of our PS2 Slim here. That's not bad. Like, is it coming off of eBay? It looks pretty good inside. I'm used to a ton of dust bunnies and all kinds of junk in there. The PS2 fat model also doesn't look too bad overall, but there's our initial look. Now, you can see immediately difference in heat sinks, right? We have a couple of larger heat sinks here, and this one heatsink in this PS2 Slim. Something to keep in mind with the two systems and the way Sony had the cooling setup, however, is we do have a more, I would say, direct kind of airflow here for the Slim model, where they were looking to push air through the heatsink and out of the back, whereas on this side, Sony set it up more of a pulling motion, and it was pretty much just like, hey, let's pull all the air we can out of the back. It wasn't as directed as we have here with our Slim, where the fan is like legitimately right up against our heatsink. Now, both systems did work to kind of make its own little tunnel almost for the air. This used the top part here in order to do so, where it would basically just make contact with the metal and then just kind of push out. Whereas this one already had it set up and would just use the plastic on this side to close off, and then the disk drive and some of this plastic would close this side, and you would get pretty good airflow from the front here through the back. I also do like the PlayStation 2 Slim when it comes to repairing, mostly because from what I remember with the PS2 Slim and my experience, the drive itself or the laser assembly is what would have issues. And it's right here. Like, I'm already taking it out with a couple of screws and I would be able to replace it pretty easily from here, whereas with the larger PS2, the lid has to come off, then you have to do some tabs and work to kind of get the entire drive up, and then you can replace it. So repairability wise, just being able to get to everything, the PS2 Slim is quite a bit better. So for the most part, I removed the screws for the laser assembly. We also had one screw up here, a smaller screw, and then the whole thing kind of just lifts up out of the plastic. Like I said, the PS2 Slim is a pretty easy system to get apart. Some screws on the bottom, and then we should be able to see our board. All right, and with the screws out, the metal plate comes off the top along with the heatsink there. And we do have a thermal pad that's covering up our main chip, which this one appears to be, yeah. So this is one of the revisions they did, and the Slim did have some that were different. However, this one does have the Emotion Engine and the graphics synthesizer combined onto one chip here. We also have our RAM directly next to it, but in some of the Slims, they had this board rearranged a bit to where we'd have the Emotion Engine chip and then the graphics synthesizer kind of off to the side. So I pulled some screws out. The whole top part basically came with it, and you can see some of the dust bunnies and stuff in there, so I'll have to clean that all up. But I mean, you can already kind of see just how much larger this is inside because of all the extra stuff that Sony had to pack in with this. The one thing I will say, the memory card slot is modular, which is nice considering on the Slim it's soldered to the board. And I don't really know if a lot of memory cards snapped off inside of it, but it is nice to be able to just kind of replace it without having to do any soldering. Now let's flip this over and we can see the two biggest things that made this as large as it is, and that has to do with the hard drive tray here and the power supply. I mean, you can see just how much space those took up. So I removed the hard drive cage as well as the power supply, and there's a ton of smaller screws underneath of here going through into the motherboard. Also, how annoying is it that the fan connector is underneath of the power supply and the hard drive shell here? We have to get all the way to this point just to unplug the fan. So if the fan fails in the PS2 and it continues to overheat, it's a lot of steps just to replace that one part that you could otherwise get to immediately. All right, with all those screws out, the bottom cage comes off, and now there's dust everywhere, but I can get to these different cables here for the disk drive. You can do it the opposite way as well and kind of work around from the sides, as these do just pretty much unplug. This is the only one that has like a kind of a bracket that you want to pop out first, but otherwise you can at least get to these from the opposite side. It's just a little harder and you want to use some tweezers. And then here's our other part that made the system as large as it was, the disk drive. You had to account for the lid that goes on top with the magnet and the area for the disk to pretty much spin effectively in here. It was obviously something that was going to be taking up quite a bit of space. This, the power supply, and the space for the hard drive with the cage. And with the heatsink off, okay, yeah, we do have both chips separated. This is the Emotion Engine here, as well as the graphics synthesizer. This is very common. I think actually this is how it always is on the older PS2 models. They went to what we see with this one, where they combined it into one chip on the Slim PS2 models. However, the earlier Slim models still used kind of this dual setup where we had both chips still separated. Our RAM is at the top here, and then we have our system battery. Unfortunately for this one, you have to go all the way down to board to get to it. Some of these older PS2 systems, you were able to access the system battery immediately. It was at times even on like the side of the the disk drive, so it was much easier to get to. Fortunately, not the case for this one. So here's the fun part with the PS2 and the PS2 Slim. You look at them when they're all together, it's pretty obvious. One is much smaller than the other, but when you get down to the motherboards, well, take a look at these. The difference in size is not nearly as drastic. In fact, here, this is the PS2 Slim board. You put it on the regular PS2 board, yeah, not that different. In fact, if you look here, there's not a lot even going on this side where we would have our network adapter wrapping around to where our hard drive would be. In fact, there's a lot of almost wasted space. Sony didn't actually have to do a lot to, essentially reinvent the PS2 completely with the smaller revision. Some of the marketing that Sony was doing at the time, they were very aggressive about this system almost being brand new, like a whole new PS2. And a lot of that was because of the size of it. The system just looked like it was much more efficient, and that Sony came to some kind of aha moment as they were going through it, and they discovered some new CPU or GPU or something in order to do it, when in fact, all they really did was kind of remove some of the internal components with the power supply and change up the disk drive and remove support for the IDE hard drive. See, typically when we go from an older device to a revision like a Slim model, whether it's with Sony or Microsoft, we have some pretty serious changes done to the internals, whether they're shrinking down the fabrication or combining things into one chip, and it's like way different with the 360 Slim. Not as much here with the PS2 Slim. Really that's the most impressive part, is Sony, for the most part, was able to use the same kind of components from the original PS2, move it to this slim profile, and people looked at it like it was the most incredible thing. I remember specifically when this was revealed in 2004, that online people were amazed by this thing. They were super impressed. And it basically went around like, this is the PS2 to get. It's this incredible thing. I can't believe they made it this small. And the whole time Sony's kind of sitting back like, yeah, we just have to remove a few things, and that was kind of it. And in fact, if you get one of the PS2 Slim models that still has the Emotion Engine and the graphics synthesizer separated on the board, they don't even look that different. So while I'd like to tell you that Sony came up with some crazy idea to make this revision work and get it down to the size of 2 game cases for the PS2, not really. No, they still use the same components internally with the board and the chips and all of this. They just kind of removed some stuff, worked a few things around, and realized that a lot of people weren't using the IDE hard drive like they thought, and they could save money and space by removing the disk tray and actually working back to the PS1. That's really about it. But let me know what you guys think about this whole comparison down below, and let me know which one you had and really even which one you prefer. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.